There's an article in The Spectator Australia about an Indigenous woman who is yet another Indigenous Australian voicing her opposition to The Voice. She bases it on the fact that, as far as she's concerned, it doesn't represent her. She disputes language like First Nations. She says that's a Canadian term. It's got nothing. She'd rather be called an Aborigine. We're seeing more and more Indigenous Australians coming out voicing opposition to The Voice. Why is this?
Because The Voice isn't our voice. It was dreamed up by a whole lot of people, Aboriginal people in Sydney and Melbourne, the elites in academia and that. The first time I heard about The Voice was just after 2017. I was out at Uluru and working in the Mutijulu community there, and I was approached by some old women, elders of the community, and they told me that they didn't like it being called, the Uluru, from the heart.
Yep.
They didn't because it wasn't their culture. It had nothing to do with their culture. This is just some dream-up thing that happened in Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra.
Is the fear amongst Indigenous Australians that if all this attention goes on to The Voice and this bureaucracy, there'll be a big building in Canberra, it'll have beautiful Indigenous artworks and whatever, people have nice jobs and cushy offices and there billions of dollars will be spent. But is there a fear that once the focus is on that, the people in the communities who need the help, they'll just be ignored?
Well, this is the issue. The people who are pushing this forward have been in charge of Indigenous affairs for the last 50 years, really. And what are the improvements have they done then? And all the other so-called voices to Parliament in regard to ADSIC, in regard to the Aboriginal Consultative Council, etc., over the years, have created this problem. When I was appointed chair of the Prime Minister's Indigenous Advisory Council by Abbott and then continued under Turnbull, we saw what the problems were. The problems was not having more bureaucrats. The problems wasn't about having some voice in Canberra. The problems was that we need to be in the communities to deal with those practical day-to-day issues in regard to getting businesses set up, getting investment, getting people into jobs, which meant kids had to go to school because you wanted a strong workforce, skilled workforce. Dealing with the crimes that Jacinta Price and her mother have been talking about for something like 20 years, and dealing with those real issues. And you said it straight away, we're going to spend billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars on this body sitting in Canberra and personicating out there, and all the money's going to be... In fact, Aboriginal organisations are complaining to me now that they're not getting funding because the money's been soaked up by this voice.
And there's also I think on a more philosophical level, we've seen in countries like Japan and Korea where they have reconciliation bodies. Tony Letford in The Spectator Australia writes about this, that once you start focusing on kind of endlessly dwelling on the past, so this idea of truth-telling, let's focus on all the bad things that happened in the past and dwell on them, you almost prevent a successful building of reconciliation. Because reconciliation, whether it's married couples who have fallen apart or whatever, it's all about let's forget that. Yeah. Let's concentrate on the future. Let's build a strong, positive future together.
Yeah, well, that's what you do. You learn about your history. There's good and bad in our history, just like every country in the world. Yep. But then it's about bringing us together as a community. And I think we've been working towards that in the last 50 years, since the 1970s.
Yep.
There's no laws that are discriminatory in Australia now against Aboriginal people. Funding, our taxpayers have bent over backwards to help groups of people. But the problem is Canberra, and it is those people who sit in the bureaucracy, is that most of the money doesn't get out. It doesn't get out where it is actually needed. And it's about people personicating out there. And now these people want to be in the Constitution to really control Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people are sick and tired of governments, sick and tired of bureaucracies. They want to get out there and start building their own economies, building their own businesses. And we've seen that over the last 7 years, from the Abbott and Turnbull government, which did a good job in Indigenous affairs, of putting something like $6.7 billion in contracts to Aboriginal businesses, and that's where the difference is going to be made, because you're going to get people who have jobs being able to buy their own houses and be able then to get their kids to school, and that will improve the crime rates. It's not rocket science to work this out.
And you have done an amazing job with the building businesses, and the work you do is sensational, Warren. I just love what you just said. It's the absolute perfect insight. The problem is Canberra. That you've summed it up. You're not going to help Indigenous Australia by focusing on Canberra. The problem is Canberra. Warren Mundine, thanks so much. Always great to chat to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.